Please help me welcome Dr. Jim Luckard.
Greetings from Simi Valley, California. People say, where's that? It's about half mile past reduced speed. It's actually west of Los Angeles, and it's not Catalina. So how does that happen? You say, well, California kind of juts out between LA and Santa Barbara, and we're kind of out there somewhere. But anyway, who cares? I would share, I do have the joy of working with Dr. Edward on a really important committee at CSO. It's called the Cultural Integrity Committee, and we've been doing a lot of really good work together and having a lot of fun as well. So you'll be hearing more about that as we go along. But now I'm going to try to interpret the last song you heard in my talk. Okay. So forgiveness, oh boy, the metaphysical F word, as I like to call it. Everybody agrees that forgiveness is a good thing, but all of us have something that we're kind of holding in reserve that we're not letting go of. Because what happens when you've been wounded or hurt or you've been betrayed or something has happened that would require forgiveness in order to set you free is that you tend to create, and I tend to create, a field of justification around how we feel about it. Another element that is true about forgiveness has to do with the lens through which we see it. And the traditional lens that's very prevalent in our culture is, if I forgive someone, then somehow I'm doing something good for them. I'm letting them off the hook, let's say. And who wants to do that? Right? So what I'm talking about, and I'm sure you're exploring this month as it's your monthly theme, is how do we frame this idea of forgiveness in a science of mind, new thought, metaphysical context that allows us to look at it from a sacred perspective, but also from a psychological perspective. So let's move forward and see what we have here. When I've been wounded, and it can be anything from a slight, someone slights me, up to a really significant betrayal, or actually someone, attacked me, physically or emotionally or both. I tend to get into that place of going within. When we feel wounded, we tend to withdraw. We tend to close in, kind of lick our wounds a little bit, And often what happens is we begin to form a story around what happened. And it's a very emotionally charged story. And often almost always, it relates to something about ourselves that we sort of suspected all along. Often the hardest things to forgive are the things that triggered something about us that we didn't like. And it made us think of that. Maybe weakness or ineffectuality or feeling disempowered or diminished. And whatever happened in the incident reminded us of that at a deep emotional level. And so we feel justified for being upset or angry or disappointed or whatever it is that soup or stew of emotions that kind of gets associated with that kind of an event. Don't worry, it'll get happy later. Right now we have to go into this place, But what rises out of that is often resentment. We resent whoever we feel harmed us or ourselves or both. Okay, and resentment is really a harmful thing. Resentment, I think it's going to come up here, we're trusting. There it is. It's like taking poison and waiting for the other person to die. If I resent you enough, maybe something awful will happen to you. But physiologically, when you're in resentment, you're releasing hormones and chemicals into your body that are harmful to your physical being. And you're releasing all kinds of emotional toxins into your emotional self. You cannot be in resentment and be a loving presence. You cannot be in resentment and have a capacity for compassion. Now, some of us hide our resentment fairly well. It's right there beneath the surface, but we've developed the capacity to kind of walk around like we're okay, you know. But quite often, right beneath that surface is a very tender spot. And if it's touched, we get triggered. Now, the problem with walking around like that, and some of us have multiple trigger points, is that we're never free. We've always got to be guarded. We've always got to be cautious. We've always got to be careful about how we interact with people around us because we don't want those wounds to be exposed. We get angry at things that have nothing to do with the wounding issue. It's very difficult. It's very difficult. When we don't forgive, we feel justified. We mentioned that, right? We feel justified. Now, another reason why we don't forgive sometimes is because we've been told that you have to forgive and forget. Okay? Now, I don't know about you. I don't seem to have any control over what I forget or remember. Because I forget a lot of stuff I'd like to remember, and I remember a lot of stuff I'd like to forget. And I bought a book on improving your memory, but I forget where I put it. And I find that my wife and I have different versions of remembering. You see, we're in a mixed marriage, a man and a woman. And sometimes I don't think that's natural. So what happens is, when I do something dumb, which happens, she remembers it forever, and I almost immediately forget it. So later, when I do it again, she is able to point out all the other times I've done it, which is why we drink. But I find sometimes that when this process is going on, I feel justified in being angry at her, and she feels justified in being angry at me, not necessarily because of what's happening now, but because of what it's triggering from our past patterns. So if I'm not in a state of forgiveness in my relationship, it's very easy to fall into a place of resentment and even condemnation. And again, when I'm in that place of resentment, it's not about anything current. It's more about stored up, unexpressed feelings. So one of the things that happens when we don't forgive is we feel justified. Another thing is we suffer. The person that doesn't forgive suffers because you're carrying around. See, I don't think we carry emotion. I think we carry the trigger points for emotion. And when the trigger point is activated, a new emotion that's just like the old emotion shows up. I don't think we store emotion, but we store memory. So somebody touches a button that's been pushed. And maybe when you were, a lot of this stuff gets developed when we're children, where we kind of get our sense of what kind of world we live in. By the time we're about 4, they say your psychological sense of yourself and the world around you, your relationship to it is pretty well set. And you've decided whether the world is a safe, supporting place or whether it's a jungle out there or somewhere in that continuum. And then we tend to spend the rest of our lives manipulating our senses and trying to manipulate other people so that our view of the world seems to be valid. One of the things about coming into a teaching like this somewhere along the pathway is that it helps us to reframe some of that, some of those mistaken identities, some of those false ideas that we've come to believe, but we still have those trigger points. And forgiveness is the only way to eliminate or remove many of those. When we don't forgive, we hurt ourselves. Isn't that a great image? It's an awful image, but it's a great image in terms of conveying a meaning. Do you ever do that to yourself? Beat yourself up over something? Put yourself in harm's way because you feel you don't deserve something in your life? We have a little game we play at our community. If someone comes up to me, or what comes up to anybody now, because it's kind of spread out, and they say, "I'm sorry," I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bump into you. I say, "You're not sorry. You're magnificent beyond measure. Stop saying you're sorry. You're not sorry." See, your subconscious takes everything you say to yourself literally. So how often do you say, "I'm sorry"? And your meaning, "I apologize." See? You're not really affirming that you're sorry, I hope, I trust. And if you are, stop it. Don't affirm that you're sorry. Don't affirm that you are anything that you don't want to see yourself as. It's a little thing. It's appropriate to apologize. It's not appropriate to say you're sorry, yet the social convention, see, we have a lot of social conventions that don't serve us, that keep the stuff we need to reveal hidden and cause us to feel diminished. And that's just one of them. Stuart Wilde, I heard him give a talk one time, and he talked about a convention that he wanted to start. Social convention was when you did something that harmed someone, and ultimately, metaphysically, we know you can't harm anyone else and no one can harm you, but you know what I mean. You step on their toe or something. That instead of saying, "I'm sorry, I apologize," you just acknowledge what you did. You say, "I stepped on your toe. Love me." And the correct answer, the socially correct answer would be, "I do love you." Imagine life if that were so. Well, then you have to go on to, there's a consequence, right? It doesn't eliminate the consequence. You know, "Dad, I wrecked the car. Love me." "I do love you. Now let's go get that car fixed. It's coming out of your allowance and out of you." "Dear, I slept with your sister. Love me." "I do love you, and I'm seeing my attorney in the morning." See, it's not about eliminating the consequence. This teaching, we're not about eliminating consequences. We're about recognizing and honoring and being responsible and accountable for our consequences. So we have to be attentive in life to where we're off track with that, where we've adapted a convention maybe that keeps what needs to be revealed hidden. So that's just one example. When we don't forgive, we can't move forward. We're stuck in old memories and old stories. Some of you have been going to lunch on this story for a long time. Some of us have built relationships based upon our sense of being wounded. And we have agreements, unspoken agreements with the other people in the relationship that they will let us tell our story as often as we like, and they will sympathize, and then we get to listen to their story, and we will sympathize. Now, sympathy is not compassion. Sympathy is like this. Let's say you hear someone they tell you their story of being wounded or a difficult situation, and you say, "Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that." And what you're thinking at subconscious level is, "That's too bad. I'm glad I'm not you right now." Compassion begins with, "I am you right now, and you are me, and your story is my story, and I can only respond with empathy." See, if I'm in resentment because of all these unforgiven grievances that I hold, I'm not available to be compassionate with anyone. I can be sympathetic. Sympathetic implies separation. So see, forgiveness holds me back, or the lack of forgiveness holds me back from expressing myself fully, from being fully available for myself or others, because I'm always protecting something. There we go. When we do forgive, we're free. I was told that was a typical Santa Rosa couple. In the 1950s. We're free. Free from what? Free from all that emotional baggage dragging behind us. Robert Bly wrote this great poem it's about the shadow self called The Long Bag We Drag Behind Us. And he says every time you need to repress something because you can't look at it, you break it off and you throw it in the bag. But the part you broke off is now unavailable to you. And maybe the part you broke off was your ability to be intimate. It was your intelligence or your wisdom or your vulnerability. And it's in the bag. And after a while, the bag gets so heavy, you can't move forward anymore. So what's required to reintegrate those parts of ourselves that we have repressed and denied is forgiveness. The capacity to say, I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to accept full responsibility for my own experience of this. I can't blame someone else for what I'm experiencing. As Louise Hay, the great teacher Louise Hay says, blame is always off the track. It doesn't mean I want to have them in my life anymore. It may not be safe to have that person in your life. It may not be desirable in any way. Hey, they may have been a stranger. You didn't even know them. So forgiveness doesn't mean I have to forget, and it doesn't mean I have to like whoever I'm forgiving. It means I have to release them from any accountability to my experience. Forgiveness is giving up all hope of a better yesterday. Really? Because isn't that a big part of the story process? Oh, I wish it had turned out that way, or I wish I hadn't said that, or I wish I'd done this differently, or I wish I'd made a different choice, or I wish I hadn't known that person. Well, that exercise is futile, for one thing, because you can't undo the past. You can't unring a bell. Once the bell is rung, the bell is rung. So acceptance is a big part of forgiveness. Acceptance is just saying, yeah, it happened. I'm not going to deny that it happened. I'm not going to try to wish it away, because I can't do that. So I've just got to say, yeah, it happened. That's all. Just be able to say that. Yes, it happened. And the next step then is to say, what am I going to do about it within myself? How am I going to carry this forward from this point forward? I get a choice as to how I'm going to live this story. So I might as well create a story around it that serves me rather than one that doesn't. And the ones we feel most justified, we believe that's the only way we can think about it. But maybe the worst thing that ever happened to you puts you on a pathway that would have been unavailable to you otherwise. You have no way of knowing whether that's true or not. So, hey, we're making it up anyway. We might as well make up something that works, something that serves, something that carries us forward toward who we would choose to be in the world. Our founder, Dr. Holmes, said, the person who is to succeed will never let his mind dwell on past mistakes. He will forgive the past in his life and in the lives of other people. If he makes a mistake, he will at once forgive it. See, my wife and I made a determination in our relationship. Now, I have to say, I did have a 25-year internship before this marriage. But as we entered this marriage, the intention was to do it as consciously as we could. And part of that was to agree to be in a continual state of forgiveness for ourselves and each other. Doesn't relieve any responsibility. In fact, it amplifies accountability and responsibility. But it means we don't hold grudges. See, in my past marriage, we had an agreement not to go to bed angry. Anybody ever do that? Yeah. One time we stayed up for 4 months. It was exhausting. Because we didn't know. We didn't know how to do this. So I have forgiven myself for not knowing in that relationship, so I can move on. What I don't forgive holds me back. So I want to move forward. And I'll forgive when I'm good and ready. This can be taken a couple ways. One is, well, I'll forgive when I'm good and ready, implying I never will be. The other is, I'll forgive when I'm good and ready because it's the only way I can ever do it. I can't be forced into forgiveness. Just like, you really can't be forced into an apology. I remember when I was a police officer for 24 years in Dade County, Florida. Like many of you. So I've seen some stuff, okay? And I was there during all the Miami Vice days and all that stuff. But what I noticed there, because one of the big values to me of that was I got to see other people have problems that I didn't then need to have. I was determined to learn from what I observed. And you see a lot of real, the police don't come into your life if everything is going well. I did notice that. But I also noticed that I needed to be in a forgiving state or else that job would drive me crazy. If I held grudges against people that spit on me or tried to punch me or successfully punched me or who got off scot-free in court when I knew they were guilty, what I realized pretty quickly was that would eat me alive. It was like putting acid into my system. And I had to learn to allow other people to be on their own pathway and recognize, hey, they would have spit on anybody with a uniform there. It wasn't about me. And be able to treat that person with dignity even after that. Took a while, but I figured it out through trial and error that seemed to work best. So when I heard the concept of forgiveness in science of mind classes way back when, it made sense to me because I could relate it to what I'd been doing. The languaging was a little different. But I recognized that the cops that ate themselves up, that became bitter and angry, were the ones that could not release the apparent grievances that had occurred. And they became a bundle of grievances. One of the nice things about being a cop in South Florida was you got to play golf free at Century Village, which is a retirement home. There's like 4 of them, and they have like 40,000 people in each one of these places. It's frightening. But, well, because what I found was, as we'd play golf and get to know some of these folks, many of them were really bitter. They were angry at their kids. They were angry at the world. Life hadn't treated them fairly. They felt abandoned. They felt alone. It was so bad, and this actually happened. One time, the day before I played, because I heard about it the next day, a gentleman had a heart attack and was laying on the ground on the 18th fairway. And 4 foursomes played through before anybody alerted the people in the clubhouse. Doesn't make you look forward to old age, does it? But see, what I came to realize was the anger that the folks were carrying around, the bitterness. And all they had to look forward to, many of them, was to die. And here's this guy laying there reminding them of that. So they resented him. He did pass away, by the way. Well, if you got to go, a golf course isn't really a bad place, right? But that bitterness, see, that bitterness is a result of a harvest of unforgiveness. It's a result of the release of all those chemicals and hormones into our being all over the year that makes us sore and stiff and unable to move around freely. It's about being restricted and closed in. And there's this great quote by George Bernard Shaw where he talks about being a clod of ailments. You know the term, it has to do with prosperity too. You know the term tightwad? people that cling to their money and keep closed in. Prosperity works when you're open and free. Life works when you're open and free. Relationships work when you're open and free. Your health is better when you're open and free. I'll forgive when I'm good and ready. My invitation to you is to make the choice to be ready and do the work necessary, which begins with A, accepting what happened. B, for yourself first, love yourself. You don't have to like anybody involved. You have to love yourself, love the other person. What do I mean by love? I mean very simply, hold harmless and wish well. So if somebody harmed you or you're holding a thing about somebody else, hold them harmless. Say, you know what, my feelings about the incident have nothing to do with them. And I wish them well. Go have a good life. And I wish the same for myself. I hold myself harmless. In other words, I forgive myself. Doesn't relieve me of any accountability. But I'm able to free that sense of grievance. And I wish well. And for all of you, I hold you harmless, and I wish you well. Thank you, and namaste. Thank you.